Here we are, having Leadership Magazine, chatting with Professor Sampson Mamphweli, Director of the Center for Renewable and Sustainable Energy Studies, CRSES, at the University of Stellenbosch. Professor, please tell us a bit about yourself. How did you come to be where you are today?
I was born in a small village in Limpopo. It's called Chiwulana village. That's where I was raised, and I did my schooling there in Limpopo, and then afterwards I studied environmental science at the University of Venda up until master's, and then I worked for the Kruger National Park Scientific Services. Later, I joined the University of Cape Town as a research technician. And then I had grown interest in energy in general and renewable energy in particular. And because of that interest, I started looking for opportunities in the energy sector. And that's when I came across an advert by the University of Fort Hare for a research fellow that would be working on biomass gasification as a project that was funded by ESCOM. So I did my application, and then that was in 2004. And then later in 2004, I was called for an interview by the university. And after the interview, they told me that I got the position. And then I moved to Alice in the Eastern Cape, where I started doing I registered for a PhD in physics while conducting research on biomass gasification as an ESCOM research fellow. And then from there, I graduated my PhD in 2010, and in 2011, I became a postdoc at the Fort Hare Institute of Technology at the same University of Fort Hare, conducting research on biomass gasification. At that point in time, I had also moved around to solar energy research and biogas digesters research. And then I started recruiting a group of students to work with me. And 2012, I got appointed for the first time at the university as a senior researcher at the Institute of Technology, dealing with biomass and bioenergy. And then I worked at the University of Fort Hare, implementing a number of renewable energy projects from 2012 up until I left the university in 2017, after being asked nicely by Stellenbosch University to come and join them and lead the Center for Renewable and Sustainable Energy Studies.
They tracked you down. Which of the projects in Fort Hare do you think had the most impact?
I implemented a biomass gasification project that had a 150 kVA engine that was powering a community bakery that was started as part of my PhD. That had a huge impact because the community was baking bread and selling the bread and making money for the project. Employed about 11 people, so it made a huge difference. The other ones that I implemented, which I think made a huge impact, were on the biogas digesters side. I installed, it could be about 50 to 60 biogas digesters at household level, where people, community members were using cow dung to produce biogas, which is clean, instead of relying on wood. And then they use it for cooking, and then the effluent, they were using it in their home gardens. So I think that's where I made the projects made a huge impact.
And those projects are still operating, right?
Most of the projects are still operating. Most of the biogas digesters are still on the ground. I used robust systems. Some of the digesters are not being used because some of the people are kind of lazy to feed the systems. But in some cases, you find in a household, you find champions that are excited about these things, who would then proceed to feed with the systems, and then they use them quite often.
Champions are always necessary, and obviously you yourself are a renewable energy champion. What was it that sparked your interest in renewable energy?
It was mainly because of my background. When I grew up in the village, there was no electricity. So I grew up basically in the dark. And as someone who liked physics a lot, I remember back then, my father had an old bakkie, 1969 Toyota bakkie, those ones with mirrors on the bonnet. And then we had two batteries that during the day when the bakkie is running, it will be charging them. And at night, then I would take one of the batteries and connect the DC lights and light up the house. And that's where the interest started growing because of that kind of challenge. And then I started, and I was more into the physics side of things by then. And then the interest just grew until I did a project when I was doing my honors degree. I looked at the impact of firewood harvesting in the area where I was living, and I made some recommendations around electrification of the villages and things like that. So that's where basically my interest came up. And because of that background, I ended up doing research that was more aligned towards solving rural energy problems.
I think we'll return to that point in a couple of questions because it's very, very important. However, so 2020, it's been full of, this year's had its challenges. How's your 2020 been with the pandemic, the lockdown, etc.? Has it affected your work, your projects?
Yes, to a certain extent. When the lockdown started, because it was something entirely new, we had kind of a slow start to the year because it happened around March, somewhere there, while we were just picking up on the activities. So I would say it slowed down things, especially at laboratory level, for about 2 to 3 months. And then with time, when we started learning about the pandemic and what systems could be in place, especially with the way we were operating, working from home. So most of the work that we could do working from home kind of continued normally, even though we started having the online meetings started picking up, taking up most of the day, as we're seeing now these days. But I would say we have kind of recovered after when the country went into lockdown level 3. Things started to open up a bit. With the students coming back to the labs, obviously we started seeing a lot more progress. So I would say yes, it has impacted, but we have recovered quite well.
So on an operational level, you experience the same challenges as most people. On a research level, has the pandemic yielded any useful insights that could be applied in the energy field?
Yes, the pandemic has really opened up our eyes, especially when it comes to things like systems integration. For instance, the focus now has been how do we monitor systems remotely, for instance. And that kind of brings down the cost of of traveling and things like that. So as we speak now, we're working on a number of dashboard systems as the center.
Oh, I didn't quite catch that phrase. You're working on what kind of systems?
A number of dashboard systems.
Dashboard systems, okay.
Yes. So those systems we want to use to monitor most of our systems that are out there in the field. So we have what we can say field research that we do in the farms, where we have got systems that we're monitoring. We have installed systems in schools that we're monitoring. So now we've started looking at things like remote data acquisition, where I sit in my office and I can monitor, I can download the data and monitor the performance of a biogas digester installed in another province, for instance. And we're seeing that opening up a lot of other opportunities in the energy space as well.
And that would even translate into opportunities for any energy champions in rural areas to participate in monitoring maintenance. I'm just guessing.
Yes. And we're looking at already from the center's point of view, spinning out a company from the students that we were training, who will then run this as a business, which will be kind of a non-profit company for them to start. And with time, they'll be training other students, and we see a lot more of this kind of spin-off companies coming into the picture and providing that kind of service. So we're seeing a lot more integration of ICT into the energy space and taking advantage of the fourth industrial revolution.
That's real impact research as well. I suppose that your research also has applications in the energy efficiency space.
Yes, we're doing a lot of work in the energy efficiency space, both at research level and also at on the consulting side of things, as well as on rural schools projects. So we have signed a number of NDAs, of a number of agreements, memorandum of agreements with a number of municipalities and agencies. And for instance, we have one memorandum of understanding or of agreement with the Drakenstein municipality. So what we're doing there in terms of energy efficiency, we're going into some of their schools, we're looking at their energy demand and the consumption, and we then looking at the various interventions that we can implement in the schools to bring down the cost of the electricity. And that is yielding a lot of good results.
Do you collaborate with the NCPC and UNIDO, for example?
We haven't done any work with the NCPC, but we have collaborated with UNIDO in the past. I remember when I was still at the University of Fort Hare, I was under the same program that we're running here, and we collaborated on some biogas digesters projects, for instance, in that area.
We have all these wonderful projects, yet as a whole, South Africa is still in an energy crisis. Even though we haven't had load shedding for a couple of months, we have a terrible imbalance between demand, supply, cost. We're going to need more power as the years go by. How can we as a nation manage the demand and ensure that we come out of the crisis?
That's a very good question and an exciting one and interesting as well, because I just came out of the investment conference now. I was attending online, and the president was, it started yesterday with the Minister of Energy, Mr. Gwede announcing that South Africa is going to procure 11,800 megawatts of new capacity, and that will be added into the grid by 2030. And today, the president, in less than an hour ago, announced that we will have bid window 5 before the end of December this year. And on top of that, he also announced the fact that, which is something that is not new, the new ESCOM plan to say ESCOM will be kind of divided into transmission, generation, and distribution, with transmission partly privatized. And the minister also talked about that yesterday. And the whole issue is to kind of bring competition into the generation side. And once we introduce competition, then we will get a better price for the energy that we will be procuring from the different role players that are in competition. So I would say, as things stand, it looks, the future looks bright if government implements all these plans that they have in place. At the same time, from the center's point of view, we have been working with a number of researchers and also assisting ESCOM in a study. And in that study, what we're looking at is how best do we locate renewable energy projects. In the past, you will recall that we were locating renewable energy projects based on where do we get the most resource. And that then meant that most of the projects would go to the Northern Cape, most of the solar energy projects will go to the Northern Cape, and most of the wind energy projects will go to the Eastern Cape. Mm-hmm. Now, what our study is doing, and then that was now starting to put a pressure on the grid in the Eastern Cape and the Northern Cape part of the country. So what our study is doing, we're looking at how best do we locate these projects for grid support. So we're looking at when are we having our peak in the demand, and in order for us to flatten that peak, where do we have the resource at that particular time when the peak, the demand is at the peak. So for instance, you would have a lot of solar energy resource around lunchtime in Limpopo. But at that point in time, that's when the peak is higher. And then we would say, okay, we're not implementing any project there, because if we compare Limpopo and the Northern Cape, then the Northern Cape is much better, but the Northern Cape at that point in time may not have the best solar resource. So it's a matter of identifying at what time do we have the most resource where, as opposed to where do we generally have the most resource. So that studies like those, which will then be presented to ESCOM within the next 2 to 3 months, will also assist the grid a lot, and ESCOM and the country a lot.
It's funny, it's like we spend 5 years kicking the can down the road after the most successful, after the incredibly successful REAP project, and then suddenly somebody slams on the brakes and you miss 5 years. But now suddenly we're waking up again, and almost at the 11th hour, suddenly there are viable plans that could save us. So at a policy level, people are saying the right things, and we'll hope that will translate into action. What about South Africans, ordinary citizens? Do you think that people generally are also waking up to renewable energy, the possibilities of a renewable energy?
Yes, we have seen quite a lot of interest now in renewable energy. I think, like they say, every problem has got the good side of it. Because of this intermittency in the supply by ESCOM, most people started looking at what are the alternatives. And the obvious alternative is renewable energy. So we have seen, even with us as the center, people contacting us directly saying, hey, can you give me advice on what kind of system I can install in my house? Even yesterday, I had people calling me where I live, coming to me just for advice on what kind of system can we get and where can we get these kind of systems, you know, and we've had quite a lot of those kind of inquiries. And because of that, we are working on some other platforms that we will disclose at a later stage, that will assist the country in general, so that people, instead of coming to us, they will be able to reach out to those platforms and get a lot of help. They will get a lot more help than what we can give at the moment. So that's part of the good things that's coming out of some of these challenges.
I guess that there's also more interest, more and more students are probably discovering that there are opportunities in the energy space.
Yes, that's correct. The program that we're running here has trained more than 700 students since its inception. I think it was in 2013 or so. And we have seen a lot more interest by students, and most of them are also looking on the business side of things as well, to say, if I have this kind of knowledge in the renewable energy space, I can be able to exploit opportunities that are existing now. And we've seen that also with the attendance of our short courses that we have. We're starting to have a lot more students who are coming in just to gain some knowledge on solar PV, on wind energy technologies, the installation and the maintenance part of things. And when we ask around, most of them tell us, I want to go into business and do these installations because most people are now interested in this.
Is there also the potential that South Africa could develop manufacturing capacity to meet these needs?
Yes, most definitely. That's one of the things that we are pushing heavily through our programs at the center now. And that's being pushed heavily also by national government. So local manufacturing, technology localization, partnering with the private sector. We're busy with things like that. And there's a big drive from government for industrialization. And you will recall that when we started with the REAP program back then, there was a lot of interest in the manufacturing part of things. And when we went through that period where there was kind of policy uncertainty, most of the people kind of withdrew from manufacturing because the market there was market uncertainty. And South Africa, even the president mentioned it this afternoon, South Africa stands a very good chance of being a base for renewable energy systems and technologies for the rest of the African continent. We've got the capacity to do it on the research side. We've got technologies that we've developed. We have the capacity to establish these big manufacturing facilities. We've got policy certainties in terms of the economy and things like that. So there are very big rooms for improvement on the manufacturing side of things.
So we're talking about where a year or two ago people were talking about how South Africa is de-industrializing. Now we have the opportunity to re-industrialize if we play our cards right.
That's correct.
And then on top of that, the solutions that people like yourself have developed are very much in tune with the needs of ordinary people in the African context. I'm sure that that's also a competitive advantage when it comes to dealing with other African countries.
Yes, I have done, through our African Research Universities Alliance Center of Excellence, which also sits within this our center here. in energy, we've looked around the continent and we've seen that most of the African countries, in most African countries, there's a lot of shortage in terms of energy supply. In Nigeria, for instance, most of the population, they use generators and things like that. And now, if you look at the cost of renewable energy, technologies such as your solar and wind, it's going down drastically. So it's quite easier. It's going to become much more easier to export these technologies into the continent and energize the continent. So there is that space as well.
And of course, the ripple effects of an adequate energy supply are just incalculable in transport, infrastructure, everything like that. Now, there's a partnership between CRSES and the Eastern Cape Rural Development Agency. Could you tell me more about it?
The Eastern Cape Rural Development Agency is running what they call the Rural Enterprise Development Zones, or what they call the red zones. Now, with these red zones, they have some of them are milling facilities. Some of them have got infrastructure such as solar PV, biogas digesters. In some of them, they are doing post-harvest processing of agricultural products. They have a project in Craddock, for instance, that's supposed to produce ethanol from sugar beet. So they are running a number of these rural enterprise development zones where they go and implement projects that encourages enterprise development in the particular regions. And because of that, because of the fact that they require a lot of energy, some of them, they have, for instance, a facility where they are doing fish farming. And with things like load shedding, you would understand that if you don't pump oxygen into the water for about 30 minutes, you lose half your stock. You know, so they approached us and said, can't we form a partnership where you will come and look at our red zones and look at what are the possible interventions in two ways. One, in energy efficiency measures, where we can reduce the electricity bills, and also where we can include or recommend renewable energy technologies and do proper system sizing for them, and then take them through the entire process until they get the systems in place. So that's basically what we're doing with them. So far, we've had a visit. Their delegation came to Stellenbosch University to see what the work that we are doing. We took them through our labs. We took them to the farms where we've got experimental systems. They were quite happy. We've started looking at possibilities. And now, towards the end of this month, beginning of next month, I will be sending a delegation of 13 engineers from Stellenbosch to the Eastern Cape. And those engineers will be divided into two teams. One team will concentrate on one part of the Eastern Cape. The other team will concentrate on the other part of the Eastern Cape, visiting all these red hubs for the whole week. And at the end of that week, the two teams will come together and start looking at possibilities, or kind of firming up some of those possibilities that we have already talked about. And then we can assist them in terms of energy efficiency and renewable energy in the current systems, and also looking at working together to expand the program that they have using the energy systems that we have.
What kind of timeline do you envisage for what sounds like an amazing project?
We will be visiting them at the end of this month, beginning of next month. I think the visit will end around the 5th of December or so, and then the team will come back and start writing the plan, and then we'll go into the shutdown of the university, and then January, I think around February, we should be starting to submit some of the recommendations to them, and around March, April, we should be firming up things. And around March, we should be firming up things. And then around April, systems should be in place in the Eastern Cape already.
As quickly as that, as soon as that. It sounds
Yes.
it sounds like that's going to take quite a lot of funding, though. How does CRSES go about obtaining funding for research, impact projects, etc.?
Yeah. We run a number of national programs. One, the center itself, the base funding comes from the National Department of Science and Innovation. So they give us money for our running expenses. And then in terms of the research, we run a number of research programs, some on behalf of the department and some on behalf of ESCOM. So we have at the center an ESCOM chair in power system studies, for instance. That's funded wholly by ESCOM, but it's still within CRSES. And then we have a number of other research chairs like the African Research Universities Alliance Center of Excellence in Energy, that's funded by through some European programs, including Horizon 2020 and the Strategic Fund at the university. And then we have private companies that come and partner with us in supporting research chairs, such as the Skatex Solar. They have a research chair within the center on solar PV. And then we have some of the programs that are sitting at the National Research Foundation, such as the Bioenergy Research Chair. So we've got a number of funding streams. And then on top of that, we do what we call contract research, where we do specialist consulting studies and advise clients on a number of things, and then we get funding. Now with the Eastern Cape Rural Development Agency, they also got some funding from the Presidential Infrastructure Program. So some part of that funding they will use to implement some of the systems that we will recommend. And over and above that, even with the municipalities where we have agreements, we also write joint funding proposals to different, responding to different calls for proposals. So that's basically how we manage to fund our activities.
You mentioned the President's Infrastructure Program. So I recently discovered the existence of, there was a symposium not so long ago, the Sustainable Infrastructure Development System methodology was outlined. It's with the Departments of Public Works and Infrastructure and also Dr. Ramakgope in the presidency. Do you know about that?
Yes, I'm quite aware of that program.
And are you going to be involved? Is the center going to be involved? Because there's quite an emphasis on renewable energy within that framework.
Yes, we are going to be involved already with the Eastern Cape Rural Development Agency. We will be involved in their part where they've already got the letter of award. But over and above that, we're going into communities. Like at the moment, we're working with a community in Limpopo, where we're looking at establishing an innovation center. Already there's infrastructure there that's a multi-purpose community center. So we're looking at establishing an innovation center where we will send interns or unemployed graduates. We're looking at about 30 unemployed graduates that will spend about three years there. And as they drop off, others will be coming. So the center will always have about 30 interns. And those 30 interns will be housed at the center. They will then work with the communities around them on the food, energy, and water nexus. And for that, we will partner with the community. We will partner with the University of Venda and the University of Fort Hare. So we will be working on a proposal that we will then submit to the Presidential Infrastructure Program through the Limpopo government, provincial government, so that that center can be augmented, so to speak, with additional laboratories and accommodation for the students. And all that will be based on, it will be like a green village, because it will be based on energy efficient designs in terms of the structures themselves. And also they will have solar panels for electricity, and some wind turbines for electricity provision, and we will be putting up biogas digesters as well for their cooking needs. So the sewage that comes from the building will go through first a digester before it goes into the septic tank, and then we'll harness the gas from there, which will be now clean gas, and then they can cook using the gas. So we are eyeing and targeting the Presidential Infrastructure Program for that program. It's going to be a massive kind of program. The Water Research Commission may be involved as well on funding part of the program. The National Department of Science and Innovation has already sponsored, so to speak, a 10 kilowatt hydrogen fuel cell technology that came from part of the research that the department funds, which is sitting now as we speak at the one military hospital. There's what they call a field hospital for COVID-19. So around March next year, it will be moved to Limpopo, to that project that I'm talking about. So the department will be funding all the interns, and also they're providing funding for repurposing of the fuel cells.
What sounds so promising is that there's two things that strike me as being promising. First, this project seems to combine the cutting edge technology with traditional or rural lifestyle, such that people don't have to leave their land in order to live a decent life. They don't have to find opportunities in the city. They can have access to a decent lifestyle right where they're living, thanks to this kind of intervention.
Yes, that's one of the biggest drive that we're pushing. So when it comes to rural development, we're looking at, for instance, those students that will go into the innovation center. That innovation center will be in a rural setting. They'll be able to earn a living from there. And over and above that, we're looking at expanding that with international donors and international partners, such that it becomes a fully fledged kind of center where you will have some of those graduates coming up the ranks, becoming program managers, managing small programs from there and things like that. And we're concentrating on graduates from that particular area, so they don't have to leave the area to go to the city to find employment and things like that. So that's one of our main focus.
They will have access to top-level education and employment opportunities right in the area where they live. And the other thing that seems promising is that you could, assuming that it is successful, you could roll it out in a modular fashion. You could implement it pretty much anywhere.
Yes, that's the whole point. In Limpopo, we've got two sites. The first one is where we're going to do the first pilot, and then we'll run it for a year and a half or so, and then we'll look at starting to replicate, going to the next one and the next one. And we also targeting provinces like the Eastern Cape and KwaZulu-Natal that have got these huge rural areas. And we're looking at, that's why we're looking at agriculture, for instance. The people living there have got access to land. Most of them have got animals. If you go to the Transkei in the Eastern Cape, for instance, you find a household with more than 200 heads of sheep. And yet these people are still considered poor. But you've got graduates in the same village who understand that the 200 heads of sheep can be managed such that they can bring 500,000 rand a year, and then the family gets out of poverty immediately. But that graduate sits in the village without doing anything, waiting for employment. So our model is saying, instead of sitting in the village, not doing anything, go out there in the village and assist the village with ideas on how they can make a living out of what they have, using the energy, food, and water nexus, coming up with these ideas that we can also bring additional funders and government to fund some of the establishments that will be like post-harvest processing systems that will be in the same rural settings.
And also perhaps this approach will ultimately be easier on the land itself, such that people do not have to rely on extractive industries to the extent that they have until now. They will be able to cultivate the land for food and energy, and in a way that is environmentally more beneficial.
Yes, that's correct. So in most cases, you find that people are doing a lot of subsistence farming. Most of the land is now fallow land. It's not being used. In large parts of these rural areas, they are using land as pastures. So they've got animals, they use them for grazing, without necessarily following any agricultural kind of practice. So for instance, if there is an outbreak, there was a time where there was an outbreak for foot and mouth disease in Limpopo, for instance. Once such outbreaks come to the fore, and the communities are not educated about these things, then the losses are quite heavy. As opposed to when there are people who are constantly there, monitoring the situation, assisting the communities. A rural household with 200 heads of sheep can install a biodigester and sustain it. And then they don't have to buy electricity for cooking. Then they can use a biodigester for all their cooking needs. They can use a biodigester for hot water provision, for instance. Now and you've got the
local ICT as well, right?
And local ICT as well. So, so those are some of the things that we're looking at. Right now at the university, we're running a research project where a master's student converted your normal diesel generator, a petrol generator, these small ones that people normally use during load shedding, converted it to run on gas. And he's now running it out of biogas that's coming from a digester that's digesting piggery waste. So those are some of the things that people can then do. We can, if you have a student like that and he's got a project like that and he's sitting somewhere in a rural setting, instead of running this engine and getting a dummy load somewhere, he can then install that in a household, soundproof it, and run his experiment from there, and he's providing energy to the household at the same time. So those are that's the kind of thinking that I have.
It's nothing short of inspirational. With all these projects that you've been involved in, do any stand out as being projects that you could say that you are most proud of?
I mean, the way I like everything that that we do, that I do personally, and everything that we do at the center, with the advantage of us coordinating a wide range of research at Stellenbosch University, at the country at large, with other universities involved. There's quite a lot that excites me. If I can pick, on the solar PV side, we talked about manufacturing. There's a possibility that South Africa could be at the forefront of manufacturing a technology that's being developed here in South Africa within our program, our national program that we're managing through the hub at Nelson Mandela University, for instance. There's something that is called the CPV, or the concentrating photovoltaic module, that has been developed there. And whereas there are other few of such technologies around the world, the one that has been developed in South Africa is very, very, very unique. And people who are in the forefront of these technologies have already agreed that South Africa seems to have something very unique. So looking at something like that, that excites me, having been involved as someone who is managing these processes. And that technology has got a potential of us manufacturing these concentrating photovoltaic modules here in South Africa and exporting them not only to the African continent, but to the world, because this is unique. So that's one of those that I say they excite me. On the wind energy side, we have what we call the wind spoke at Stellenbosch University, for instance, where they've developed this grid integration system that synchronizes between the electricity being generated by the renewable energy system and the electricity that's being that's flowing in the ESCOM lines, or in the grid, so that it gets it at the right frequency, right voltage, everything spot on, so that you don't have any problems, when you feed into the grid. So those are game changers, and there's quite a number of them. If you go into the biodigesters, where I'm an expert, for instance, things like producing electricity using these petrol engines that we're converting into biogas engines, and looking at the efficiencies and the cost and all that. I think those in the near future will be game changers, especially if you look at the farming communities, the rural communities, so there's quite a lot that excites me in the field. That's why I don't think I'll retire anytime soon.
Well, hope not. So as a director, you play a leadership role. Could you tell me a bit about that, and how do you go about your role as director from a leadership viewpoint?
Yeah, leadership for me is more about steering the team, and the team that I lead is quite diverse. It's diverse in the sense that it's a rainbow nation kind of a team. It's diverse in the sense that it is a team of researchers that are not only at one institution, but in so many multiple institutions. And I am expected to provide sound leadership, under the circumstances where we're coordinating anything. So I think the most important aspect for me is, one, to listen to people that I'm leading. So I have developed over the years, I would say, some good listening skills, to an extent that I would go into a meeting, open up the meeting and listen until the end, and only come in at the end, even when the meeting is heated. And because of that, I end up taking kind of very informed decisions not imposed decisions. And I found that because of that, many people like my leadership style. Many people who tell you that I would love to work with him, you know, as opposed to any other person. And that's one thing. The other thing is delegation of authority. You know, because I'm working with experts in the fields, in the different fields, and most of them, some of them are A-rated researchers, you know, which I'm not. Some of them have got like 30, 40 years experience in the field, you know, whereas some of them are students who are just coming up, you know. So one needs to have a skill to be able to interact with everybody in a manner that they feel welcome at all times. So I always, you know, try to interact with everybody at their level as if you are the first and the last person that I'm talking to in this world. So that's what leadership is all about for me, and the delegation of authority. Because even a student, I've learned that even a student that is coming into the program, their ideas, they may have the best ideas, much better than the ideas of the people who have been in the field. But if you don't give them that space and show to them that, look, this is your thing, you must take a custody of what you are doing. You are the one who know what you are doing. I rely on you, you know. So if you do that, then you give the person full control of what they're doing, and then they express themselves to the best of their capabilities. And then when they come to you, it's on very few occasions where they need a bit of advice here and there. And then you have a better working relationship that way.
Thank you so much, Professor Mamphweli, Professor Sampson Mamphweli. That's been very enlightening and inspiring, and I think there's hope on the horizon.